Commercial DNA testing kits have been growing in popularity in recent years, with the promise of offering a window into one's background and ancestry. But just how reliable are they, and what are their limitations? I sat down with Dr. Mary Alice Abbott, Chief of Medical Genetics at Baystate Medical Center, to find some answers.
There are a number of different sorts of kits that are available to the consumer, and the focus is ancestry information. Some kits offer information about some sort of health predispositions, and this is sort of another topic that's interesting to talk about what it can reveal and what it can't reveal. And a lot of these companies have set up ways to, once you've utilized some sort of genetic testing kit, to link you to potential relatives. So those are really the three kinds of things that are happening related to direct-to-consumer genetic tests.
So let's break it apart a
Sure.
little bit. There is I think the ancestry piece that people are always very interested in, or often very interested in. And I think it purports to tell you where you came from.
Right.
But it's swabbing your cheek, right? And taking a
Right.
little bit of saliva.
Yep.
So what information can you actually yield from that?
So I think this, in fact, is the most robust part of the test, and it appeals to a lot of people. And the science behind this part of the test, in my opinion, is the strongest.
So 70% accurate. How would you characterize?
So
hard to say.
So more than 70%. This is a pretty accurate test, and it uses a technology where it looks at these little, very small variations in the genetic material that everyone have. At a certain position of your genome, you may carry the letter A, whereas I carry a letter T. And that varies. It doesn't cause disease. It just is part of your genomic variation. And so if you use a lot of those little pieces of data, those are called SNPs, use all that data together, those sorts of variations have tracked geographically over the human history. And so comparing your profile of SNPs to what we know about where those SNPs may have come from, you get a pretty nice piece of information, a pie chart or a distribution of where your ancestors probably came from.
Which is how, when the kit is returned to people, it can say, "Oh, most of you comes from Italy," or something like that.
And interestingly, as you talk to your friends or other people who've used this testing, for the most part, you'll hear people say, "My mother said I'm Italian, and I'm Italian."
So kind of confirming what we already might know about our family history.
Yeah. But there's some people who don't have the luxury of a oral family history for whatever reason, and may have interest in, are there other pieces of information or other sorts of cultures that I might be interested in learning about that may be part of my own ancestry. And the test is actually very good at doing that.
So something that I assume you think the test might not be as good at is the tests that purport to tell you about cancer risk or the likelihood that you might pass on a certain disease to an offspring.
Right. So more and more of these direct-to-consumer tests are offering some sort of health type information. And this is the area where I think the consumer needs to be very careful and really understand what is happening with this testing. The same type of technology is used to look at, is there some small genetic variation that might put me at increased risk for some sort of health condition. And there's really two categories of health conditions and technologies that are used here. And one will say something like, you may be at increased risk for heart disease. But these are the sort of genetic information that puts you at increased risk, but it doesn't really confer the kind of risk that you have a specific disease, or that your cholesterol is a certain level, or you're a smoker. This may put you at higher risk than the general population, but doesn't take into account truly your
Maybe
family
you exercise
history
3 times a week,
correct,
something
right?
like
Your
that.
whole health picture.
So it's not diagnostic. It's not saying that
not.
you actually
Yeah.
have this disease.
And so I'd be very careful in interpreting those sorts of results. And you know, as a medical geneticist, this isn't the kind of technology we use in our practice. We don't find this helpful medically.
Were you surprised when the FDA approved, I think it was 23andMe was the first company to do it, them marketing this?
Right, so for a while they were doing this, and then the FDA said, no, you can't do this, there's really not enough data. And so they did scale back some of what they're reporting out. But for example, the technology that they're using to report out the analysis of the breast cancer gene is similar to what we use in diagnostic laboratories in medical genetics, but the amount of testing that they're doing is very limited. And so it does worry me a little bit that someone may think that they've had the same sort of test that their genetic counselor or a medical geneticist might order when it's really a much smaller result. And that testing can be diagnostic. So there's sort of a hybrid of some pretty high quality testing and some different type of testing. And we're also finding that testing done in this kind of venue may not be accurate, in that if it's done again at a medical laboratory, the results are not confirmed. So you need to be careful.
Would you encourage someone, if they did this testing that was either screening for any of these diseases that we've talked about, and they get something that makes them a little uneasy back as an answer, should they? Is that an opportunity to open up a dialogue with their healthcare provider?
Yeah, I really would recommend that. Starting with your primary care physician to sort of put things into context, and certainly reviewing your results with a genetic counselor. If there's something there that seems actionable, a medical geneticist or a genetic counselor in your area can review those results with you and decide, is this something that, first of all, needs to be confirmed? We need to make sure it's actually accurate.
How different, or is it, you alluded to the testing itself, is it a higher quality test that geneticists are using, or are you using blood versus saliva? What are the differences between something you grab at the supermarket or over the counter?
Yep. Well, I think there are differences in the molecular techniques that are used. There are differences. We do tend to use blood. There tends to be less failure rate than using a saliva sample, but the DNA is DNA. And I think the most important part is the counseling with the patient about what's the test that we're doing, why are we doing it, how are we going to interpret the results, and how are we going to apply those results to change what you're doing about your health.
Because you might go forward with some pattern of treatment, I imagine, if you find something out. I read in The Republican in Mass Live that you said that genetic testing is sometimes not a yes or no answer. And I think that people might think that it is. Can you talk a little more about that?
Right. So your test results might suggest that there's an increased risk, but again, you have to put that in a larger context. Also, and this isn't so much true for these over-the-counter tests, but in genetic testing in general, oftentimes we detect that there's some variant, there's some difference in your genetic material compared to what we consider what's the normal reference. But we don't know if that variation causes disease or does anything. It could be sort of normal human genetic variation. So it's not always a black and white answer. And there's 25,000 genes. So when you're looking at one letter of one gene and expecting it's going to make a big impact on your health, there's a lot of other things happening that can influence that.